Ancient writing hides as many secrets as it reveals. For centuries, scholars have been baffled by mysterious inks, compositions that defy translation and logic. This is a journey through 25 of history's most enigmatic texts, from cursed scrolls to invisible treasure maps. These artifacts challenge everything we think we know about the past and the technology of communication. By the end, you will possess a map to the world's greatest unsolved written puzzles. How could an entire book remain unreadable to modern computers? What hidden fortune might be described in code on sheets of copper? Ink was never just a tool. It was a medium for magic, for espionage, and for profound secrets meant to outlast empires. We are about to decode its greatest mysteries. What do you believe is the most powerful secret ever put into words? Our journey begins with the single most famous unreadable book on Earth. In a vault at Yale University lies a small, palm-sized volume bound in soft vellum. Its pages are filled from edge to edge with a flowing script of unknown letters, curling like tendrils of ivy. This is the Voynich Manuscript. Next to the text are illustrations of a world both familiar and utterly alien. You will see bulbous, naked women bathing in strange green liquid flowing through elaborate plumbing. There are fantastical plants with roots and leaves that match no known species on our planet. There are intricate charts of the stars and circular diagrams that seem to map unknown constellations. Every page is a beautiful, maddening puzzle. The ink itself, analyzed by modern scientists, is a standard iron gall ink of the medieval period. The vellum has been carbon dated to the early 15th century. The materials are ordinary. It is the message they carry that is extraordinary. For over a century, the world's greatest cryptographers have tried to break its code. Soldiers from the First and Second World Wars, experts who cracked enemy ciphers, turned their minds to this little book and failed. In the 21st century, artificial intelligence systems have been unleashed upon its text. These machines can process language patterns beyond human capacity, yet they too have yielded nothing conclusive. The script shows a statistical structure similar to a real language, with word lengths and character repetitions that follow natural rules. But it corresponds to no known tongue, past or present. So what is it? The theories are as wild as the illustrations. Some say it is an elaborate, centuries-old hoax crafted to fool a wealthy patron. But the consistency and complexity of the text, spanning over 240 pages, make a meaningless forgery seem an immense, pointless labor. Others believe it is a coded herbal text, a pharmacopoeia of secret knowledge where the plants are deliberately drawn wrong to conceal their true identities. Perhaps it is a lost language from a remote culture now completely extinct, or, as some fringe thinkers suggest, it is a message not of this world. The Voynich Manuscript stands as a monument to human frustration. It is a book that whispers just loud enough to be heard, but in a language we have forgotten how to understand. It asks us a profound question. What do you do when you hold a message in your hands, knowing it was written with purpose, yet the purpose is forever locked away? This is the power of mysterious ink. It can create a silence more deafening than any shout. If the Voynich Manuscript is a locked book, then our second mystery is a key that opens a vault which may no longer exist. Among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in clay jars in desert caves, one artifact stands utterly apart. It is not written on fragile parchment or papyrus. It is the copper scroll, and its message is hammered directly into thin sheets of the metal itself. Imagine the effort. Instead of a reed pen and ink, a scribe used a chisel to painstakingly engrave letters into soft copper, a material meant to last for millennia. This was not a literary or religious text, it was a list written in a different form of Hebrew, with a strange matter-of-fact tone that describes 64 hiding places. And what was hidden? The inventory is staggering. It mentions vast quantities of gold and silver, specific weights in talents, along with precious incense and other treasures. The descriptions are tantalizingly vague yet precise. One entry might say, in the ruin that is in the valley under the steps, 42 talents of silver. Another directs the seeker to a cistern or a cave. The total tally, if taken literally, amounts to tons of precious metal, a fortune that would be worth hundreds of millions today. But here is the central puzzle. Is this a literal treasure map, or is it something else? Some scholars believe it is an accurate record of the riches from the Second Temple in Jerusalem, hidden away before the Roman destruction in the 1st century. The copper itself, resistant to decay, was chosen as the perfect permanent record for such vital information. Others argue the amounts are too fantastical, too vast to be real, and propose the scroll is an allegorical text, a piece of religious symbolism rather than a practical guide. Yet the very physicality of the object argues against that. Who goes to the immense trouble of engraving allegory on expensive metal plates? The ink here is not a pigment, but the negative space created by the chisel, the absence of metal that forms each letter. This choice of medium shouts intentionality. This was a message meant to survive fire, water, and time, to be read by someone in a distant future. That future is now, and it has sparked a modern treasure hunt. For decades, archaeologists and adventurers have used the scroll's cryptic clues to scour the Judean desert and beyond. They have dug at the bases of ancient stairs, explored countless cisterns, and scanned caves with ground-penetrating radar. Small finds have been made, like a few period coins or pottery, but the legendary tons of treasure remain elusive. Perhaps they were found and melted down centuries ago by Romans or later empires. Perhaps the directions, clear to the original hiders, are now impossible to follow because the landmarks have crumbled into dust. The copper scroll presents a different kind of agony than the Voynich. With the Voynich, we cannot understand the language. With the copper scroll, we can read every word, but the world it describes has vanished around it. The ink is permanent, but the landscape is not. It is a ghost map pointing to a treasure that may be long gone, or worse, one that is still patiently waiting, buried under tons of sand and stone, silently guarded by the most durable ink humanity ever devised. The frustration of a readable map leading nowhere is matched only by the silence of a language spoken by a single artifact. Deep in the Mediterranean, on the island of Crete, a discovery was made that traded the permanence of metal for the fragility of clay, yet sealed its mystery just as tightly. In the ruins of the ancient Minoan palace of Phaistos, an Italian archaeologist unearthed a simple clay disc about the size of a small plate. Its surface, however, was anything but simple. On both sides, a continuous spiral of strange symbols winds from the outer edge toward the center. There are 45 distinct pictographs, little stamped images of a man's head, a shield, a bird, a bee, a ship. These are not drawn with a stylus. Each symbol was pressed into the soft clay with a separate seal, like a primitive form of movable type, 1,000 years before such a concept would appear again in history. This is the Phaistos disc, and its 241 impressions are a form of ink made not from pigment but from pressure. The immediate mystery is the message. The deeper, more haunting mystery is the messenger. This disc is utterly alone. No other object like it has ever been found in Crete or anywhere else in the world. Those 45 unique seals have vanished. It is as if a single page from a completely unknown book has floated down through time, while the book itself, the printing press, and the entire library it came from have been erased from history. How do you decipher a language when you have only one example? The theories attempt to fill this void of context. Some scholars hear music in the spiral, suggesting the symbols represent the lyrics or notation for a religious hymn, the spiral acting as a path for a ritual chant. Others see practicality, proposing it is a calendar, tracking agricultural cycles or celestial events with its repeating groups of signs. there are more inventive guesses too. Could it be the rulebook for a forgotten board game, the spiral representing the playing path? Or is it, as its stamped nature suggests, a bureaucratic document, a royal inventory or a treaty, produced on the world's first known typewriter? The very technique used to create it screams of efficiency, of someone who needed to produce this specific sequence of symbols more than once. Yet we have only this one copy. This isolation is what makes the Phaistos disc a different kind of enigma than the Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich exists in a known world of medieval manuscripts. We have other books to compare it to, even if they offer no answers. The Phaistos disc is a linguistic island. It speaks a language that may have been spoken only within a single palace workshop for a single purpose on a single day over 3,000 years ago. The clay captures that moment perfectly, freezing the intention of the person who carefully pressed each seal into place. We can almost see the hands at work, rotating the disc, selecting the next symbol from a set of stamps. We can feel the presence of the creator, but their voice, the meaning they so meticulously stamped into existence, has been reduced to a beautiful, silent hum. The ink here is an impression, a physical dent in reality, and like a footprint on a lonely shore, it tells us someone was here, someone with a system, a purpose, and a story to tell. But the tide of centuries has washed away everything else, leaving only the footprint itself, a perfect and unanswered question pressed into clay. From the silent footprint of the Phaistos disc, we travel to a book that screams with chaotic, crowded life. In a Hungarian library rests the Rongorongo Codex, a dense and frantic artifact that makes even the Voynich Manuscript look orderly. Its 448 pages of fragile paper are crammed with a handwritten script so small and tight it seems desperate to contain a universe of words. Over 200 unique symbols swirl across the vellum, a mix of familiar-looking letters, geometric shapes, and tiny pictographs, all running from right to left in a relentless tide. This is not the elegant, flowing mystery of the Voynich. This is a textual panic attack bound in leather, and as if the script itself were not enough, the pages are punctuated by crude, almost childlike illustrations. They depict scenes of stark contrast, biblical figures alongside soldiers in medieval armor, crucifixions happening near pitched battles. It is a visual cacophony that mirrors the confusion of the script. The ink here is a dark, common iron gall, but its application feels frenzied, as if the writer's hand could barely keep pace with the thoughts needing to be spilled onto the page. For 2 centuries, decipherment attempts have followed a familiar path of brilliant failure. Linguists and cryptographers have tried to map its symbols to everything from Old Hungarian to a cipher based on ancient Indian scripts. Some claimed brief successes, pointing out a symbol that might mean God or a sequence that could be a date. But no system has ever held up to scrutiny. No key has unlocked more than a few ambiguous phrases before the entire structure of the supposed language collapses into gibberish. This relentless failure has birthed a controversial and haunting theory. What if the Rongorongo Codex is not a language at all, but an elaborate, meaningless fabrication? The 19th century was a golden age for historical forgeries, with a hungry market for exotic, ancient manuscripts. Could this entire book, with its overwhelming density of symbols and its jarring illustrations, be the work of a supremely talented and patient hoaxer? The argument points to the sheer inventiveness of the script. Creating over 200 consistent, reusable fake characters is a monumental task, but perhaps not an impossible one for a skilled calligrapher with time and motive. The crude drawings could be a deliberate attempt to look authentically medieval, crafted by someone who was not a true artist. This theory turns the codex from a profound mystery into a profound deception. Its value shifts from linguistic to psychological. It becomes a mirror reflecting not a lost culture, but the human capacity for obsession and trickery. Yet, even this explanation feels unsatisfying. The labor involved is almost unimaginable. Filling hundreds of pages with such consistent, complex nonsense would be a form of madness in itself. So we are left with two equally difficult possibilities. Either we are looking at a genuine, encrypted record of a world you completely lost to history, a secret history of faith and conflict penned by a hand we cannot understand, or we are looking at one of the most dedicated, pointless artistic hoaxes ever created. The ink on these pages is undeniably old, but does it hold truth, or is it the ultimate testament to a lie so well crafted it has fooled time itself? This is the razor's edge the Rongorongo Codex forces us to walk. It asks whether the greatest mystery an ink can hold is not a secret message, but the very intention of the person who held the pen. The line between a sacred text and a burial shroud is hauntingly thin in our next mystery. In a museum in Zagreb, Croatia, rests an Egyptian mummy. This in itself is not unusual. What is extraordinary is what its linen wrappings are made of. They are not blank cloth. They are inscribed from edge to edge with over 1,200 words of text written in a dark ink. This is the Liber Linteus, the linen book, and it is the longest surviving Etruscan document in the world. Its journey is a tale of ancient globalization and profound irony. The linen was produced and written on in Etruria, the land of the Etruscans in what is now Italy. It was a ritual text carefully penned by priests. Then, somehow, it crossed the Mediterranean. In Egypt, perhaps centuries later, the precious inscribed cloth was cut into long strips, deemed not a holy manuscript but simply high-quality linen, and used to wrap the body of a young woman for mummification. A sacred text became bandages, preserving both a body and a language in a single, macabre act. When the mummy was unwrapped in the 19th century, scholars faced a double revelation. They could read the letters phonetically, for the Etruscan alphabet is derived from Greek and is familiar, but they could not understand the words. Etruscan is a language isolate, unrelated to Latin or Greek, and with no surviving descendants. We have bilingual texts with only a handful of words translated, mostly names of gods and basic terms. So here we have a book we can pronounce but cannot comprehend. It is like listening to a beautiful song in a language you have never heard, catching the melody but missing every single lyric. Theories about its content hinge on the few words we do know. The text is divided into sections and it repeats certain phrases and dates. This structure strongly suggests it is a religious calendar, a liturgical manual detailing rituals, sacrifices, and festivals for specific days of the year. It is a guidebook for communicating with gods whose names we can read, but whose nature and the prayers offered to them are lost to us. The eerie power of the Liber Linteus lies in this juxtaposition. An Egyptian woman lies in eternal rest, swaddled in the sacred words of a completely different civilization, a culture that had already vanished by the time the Romans rose to power. The ink, meant to guide the living through cycles of worship, instead became part of a funerary practice it was never intended for. It performed a new function, preserving flesh, while its original function, preserving ritual knowledge, slowly faded into obscurity. This artifact is a poignant metaphor for history itself. So much of the past comes down to us not in pristine libraries, but repurposed, fragmented, and wrapped around other mysteries. We are left with the physical shell of a belief system, the careful script, a ghostly echo of ceremonies once performed under the Italian sun, now silent in a museum case, guarding a body and a secret with equal care. From the silent linen of Etruria, we travel to the echoing streets of a lost metropolis. The Indus Valley civilization flourished over 4,000 years ago, building planned cities with sophisticated plumbing, vast granaries, and trade networks that stretched from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. They were a powerhouse of the ancient world, a society of staggering complexity, and they left behind a haunting signature, a script that remains one of linguistics' greatest locked doors. Their writing appears not in grand scrolls or stone monuments, but on small, elegant objects. intricately carved steatite seals used for stamping clay or wax bear images of mythic beasts like unicorns and bulls, and above them a short line of symbols. You find these same symbols incised on pottery shards, copper tablets, and tools. The ink here is often an impression, a negative space pressed into soft clay by a carved seal, or a fine line scratched into a surface with a metal stylus. Each inscription is maddeningly brief. The longest we have contains only 26 signs. Most have just 4 or 5. Imagine trying to decipher English if you only had fragments reading J. Smith & Co. or handle with care. You might grasp it as writing, but the soul of the language, its literature, its laws, its prayers remains utterly hidden. This brevity is the first and greatest wall. Without a long, continuous text, statistical analysis is crippled. We cannot see how words combine into sentences, where verbs and nouns might fall, or how grammar structures a thought. The second, more famous wall is the lack of a Rosetta Stone. No artifact has been found bearing the same message in both the Indus script and a known language like Akkadian or Sumerian. The civilization seems to have vanished without directly passing its language to any successor we can identify, leaving its writing as an isolated bubble in time. This isolation fuels a fierce and fundamental debate. Are we even looking at a full language? Some scholars argue these short inscriptions are not writing in the sense of encoding speech, but a system of proto-writing. The symbols they suggest might represent clan names, religious icons, or commercial labels, a system of powerful emblems rather than a phonetic script that could record a king's speech or a merchant's contract. It would be a code for identity and ownership, not for poetry or history. Others point to the script's clear structure, its standardized sign list of over 400 characters, and evidence of a writing direction, to argue it is absolutely a full, complex language. They believe we are looking at the tips of vast icebergs where perishable materials like wood, cloth, or palm leaves, the true vehicles for long texts, have simply rotted away in the humid Indian climate. The implications of decipherment are staggering. If we could read these tiny impressions, the silent cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro would suddenly find their voice. We would learn the names of their gods, the titles of their rulers, the terms of their trade. We would know if they were a unified empire or a collection of city-states. We would understand the meaning behind the remarkable uniformity of their bricks and streets. Was it enforced by a rigid theocracy or a shared cultural ideal? The ink on these seals and pottery is the ghost of a bureaucracy, the shadow of a thought. To read it would be to resurrect an entire worldview, to bring a civilization that rivaled Egypt and Mesopotamia out of the realm of archaeology and into the realm of history. It is a reminder that sometimes the most profound secrets are not hidden in long, cryptic books, but in the smallest, most mundane marks, a stamp on a clay tag, a scratch on a jar, waiting for the key that will make the whole lost world speak. While the Indus script whispers from a lost civilization, other mysteries shout from the very edges of the world. On a remote island in the vast Pacific, wooden tablets bear silent witness to a catastrophic fall. These are the Rongorongo tablets of Easter Island, and their glyphs are a last, desperate testament. Carved with a shark's tooth or an obsidian flake, the ink here is a groove cut into seasoned wood. The glyphs themselves are stunningly intricate, a mix of human figures, birds, fish, and geometric shapes, arranged in a boustrophedon pattern, meaning the lines alternate direction like an ox plowing a field. This is a hallmark of sophisticated writing systems, yet when European missionaries arrived in the 1860s, they found no one who could read them. The knowledge had been extinguished. The island's tragic history provides a grim clue. Decades of slave raids, introduced diseases, and social collapse had decimated the Rapa Nui population, killing the last elders who held the key to the script. Some theories suggest the tablets were not mere records, but sacred objects, perhaps chants for the Birdman cult or genealogies of the ruling class. Their very existence challenges the old narrative of Easter Island as an isolated, primitive society. It suggests a complex culture with a need to record information, possibly right up to the moment its world imploded. The glyphs now sit in museums, a beautiful, frozen language from a people who carved giant stone heads but could not carve their own survival into history. A similar echo of lost voices comes from a bustling modern metropolis. Before Singapore was a global hub, it was known as Temasek, a thriving port, and on its shores sat a massive sandstone slab over 3 meters tall, covered in a weathered inscription. This was the Singapore Stone. By the time British colonists took note of it in the 19th century, the text was already faded, a ghost in the rock. Then, in 1843, during construction to widen a river mouth, the stone was callously blown apart with gunpowder to clear the way. Only a few fragments were saved. Today, those shattered pieces in the Singapore National Museum hold a script that remains debated, possibly a form of Old Javanese or Sanskrit. The ink here was the contrast of a carved line against sandstone, now almost smoothed away by time and salt air. Had it survived intact, the stone could have been a Rosetta Stone for early Southeast Asia. It might have detailed the laws of the port, the treaties between kingdoms, or the prayers of sailors about to embark across the open ocean. Its destruction was an act of historical vandalism that severed a direct link to the region's maritime golden age. We are left with a physical metaphor for fragility, a monument reduced to fragments, its message dissolved into the same waters that once carried the ships it likely commemorated. Together, the Rongorongo tablets and the Singapore Stone represent a specific kind of tragedy, mysteries born not from intentional encryption, but from cultural amnesia and heedless destruction. They are not puzzles waiting for a clever key. They are echoes fading in an empty room, reminding us that some ink vanishes not because it was meant to be secret, but because no one was left to protect its story. The silence of shattered stones gives way to a very different kind of American mystery, one where the ink is not ancient but relatively modern, and its promise is not spiritual but spectacularly material. In 1885, a small pamphlet was published in Lynchburg, Virginia, telling a tale that has fueled treasure fever for over a century. It is the story of the Beale ciphers. According to the pamphlet, a man named Thomas J. Beale, leading a party of 30 adventurers in 1818, discovered a massive vein of gold and silver out west in what is now Colorado. They mined it, transported the staggering haul back east, and buried it in a secret location in Bedford County, Virginia. Beale then created 3 coded messages or ciphertexts and left them with a Lynchburg innkeeper named Robert Morris along with a locked box. The first cipher was said to describe the treasure's exact location. The second listed the contents, and the third provided the names and next of kin of the party's members. Beale then vanished, never to return. Years later, Morris opened the box. Inside were sheets of paper covered in rows of numbers, the 3 ciphers. After decades of failed attempts, the pamphlet's anonymous author claimed to have cracked the second cipher. The key, he said, was a specific copy of the Declaration of Independence. By numbering each word of the Declaration and matching those numbers to the numbers in the cipher, you could extract a letter from the first letter of each corresponding word. Using this method, the second cipher translated into a stunning inventory. It described a vault containing over 2,900 pounds of gold, over 5,000 pounds of silver, and jewels obtained in St. Louis, with a total estimated value in the millions today. The ink on those original numbered sheets, then, became the only physical key to a buried fortune. But here is where the mystery twists into a modern enigma. The first and third ciphers, the ones giving the location and the heirs, have resisted every attempt at solution. Countless cryptographers, both amateur and professional, have tried the Declaration key and every other historical document imaginable, from the Constitution to Shakespeare's plays. Nothing works. The ciphers remain stubbornly locked. This monumental failure has led many to conclude the entire story is an elaborate, brilliant hoax. Skeptics point out glaring issues. The writing style of the pamphlet is suspiciously similar to the style of the solved cipher's plaintext, suggesting a single author created both. No records of a Thomas J. Beale or his enormous mining expedition have ever been found. The solved cipher itself is almost too perfect, a clean demonstration of a simple number substitution cipher that just happens to reveal a fabulous treasure, serving as tantalizing bait for the reader. The motive to sell pamphlets. The 1880s saw a huge boom in dime novels and wild Western tales, and a local printer could have crafted the entire saga as a clever marketing scheme. Yet, for the believers, the physicality of the original ciphers, those sheets of paper with numbers handwritten in iron gall ink, argues against a simple fraud. Why go to the trouble of creating such complex, unsolvable number sequences if the goal was just to tell a tall tale? The hoax theory requires the hoaxer to be both a savvy marketer and a cryptographic genius of sorts, creating two ciphers that have defied serious analysis for 140 years. The hunt has never ceased. Modern seekers have used ground-penetrating radar, historical deed research, and complex code-breaking algorithms, often focusing on a specific area near Montvale, Virginia. The landscape is now dotted with unauthorized dig holes, a testament to the powerful lure of the story. The Beale papers sit at a fascinating crossroads. They are either a genuine encrypted map to a real fortune, waiting for a genius with the right key, or they are the most successful and enduring literary prank in American history. The ink on those pages holds one of two things: precise coordinates to a hidden vault, or the elegant proof that the most valuable treasure is sometimes the story itself. A narrative so compelling it turns paper and ink into a ghost of gold that people will chase forever. The promise of treasure fades into the stark reality of a lonely death on a distant shore. In the early hours of December 1st, 1948, on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia, a well-dressed man was found propped against a seawall, as if he had simply sat down to rest and never gotten up. He had no identification. The labels were cut from his clothes. An autopsy found no clear cause of death, only signs of a heart that had stopped suddenly. He was in his prime, physically fit and utterly unknown. The police were left with a corpse and a haunting question. Who was he? The first real clue came from a hidden pocket stitched into the waistband of his trousers. Inside was a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper. Unfurled, it revealed two printed words in Persian, tamam shud. It means it is ended or finished. The phrase was the final line from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of philosophical poems popular at the time. This scrap was torn from a specific book. In a stunning break, a local man came forward with a copy of the Rubaiyat he had found in his car, which had been left unlocked near the beach that same night. The book's final page, bearing the words Tamam Shud, had been torn out. The scrap in the dead man's pocket was a perfect match, but the real mystery was on the book's back cover. There, written in a faint, spidery hand, was a sequence of letters. It was a code. The ink was a common fountain pen ink, but the message was anything but common. The letters were grouped in lines, reading WRGOABABD, then on the next line MLIROI, and so on, with a second crossed-out line that seemed to be a first attempt. This was not a random scribble. The spacing and grouping suggested a deliberate cipher, and so the Somerton man's identity became locked inside this short string of characters. The theories that emerged were as dramatic as any spy novel. The Cold War was just beginning. Was this man a secret agent killed after a failed rendezvous? The use of a poetic code, the removed labels, the untraceable poison some suspected, all pointed to a shadow world. Others saw a more tragic human story. Perhaps the code was a personal cipher, a final message to a lost love, explaining his decision to end his life. The tamam shud phrase itself, meaning finished, could be read as a suicide note in 4 words. Investigators even found what they believed was the imprint of a phone number on the book, leading to a local nurse who, intriguingly, claimed not to recognize the man's photograph but later behaved with strange secrecy. For decades, cryptographers and amateur sleuths have attacked the code. They have tried every classical cipher, from simple substitution to complex transposition methods. They have looked for patterns in the letters, searching for anagrams of names or places. Some claimed breakthroughs, suggesting it spelled out phrases like "it's over" or "my life is over," but none have been universally accepted or proven to unlock further information. The code resists a perfect tiny lock. This is a mystery where the ink is the only witness. It connects an unidentified body to a specific book, and through that book to a potential life of secrets. The letters on the back cover are not just a code, they are a ghost of intention. They represent the last conscious act of a man who knew he was about to vanish, either by his own hand or another's. He chose to write something down in ink on paper, believing it had meaning. That meaning died with him, leaving behind a corpse, a book of poems about fate and mortality, and a few lines of letters that have stared back at the world, silent and defiant, for over 70 years. The Somerton Man asks us what we do when the only clue is a message we cannot read, written by a man whose name we will never know. The silent, personal tragedy of the Somerton Man is a world away from the grand, state-sanctioned mysteries of antiquity. In the heart of ancient China, kings spoke to their ancestors not with whispers on paper, but with roars cast in metal. During the Shang dynasty, over 3,000 years ago, the most important words were not written with ink but poured. Artisans created intricate ceramic molds, into which they pressed delicate mirror image characters carved in reverse. Then they poured molten bronze over 1,000 degrees Celsius into the mold. When it cooled and the mold was broken away, the result was a magnificent ritual vessel, a cauldron, a wine goblet, a food steamer, adorned with touty monster masks and, crucially, a permanent inscription cast into its inner wall or base. This was ink forged in fire, a message made integral to the object itself. These bronze inscriptions served as divine report cards and eternal receipts. A typical text might read, "On the day Bingwu, the king conducted a ritual in the temple of Father Ding and bestowed upon me, Quer, 10 strings of cowrie shells. I, Quer, have made this precious vessel for Father Ding." They document royal gifts, military campaigns, appointments of officials, and most importantly, the outcomes of divination rituals. The Shang kings lived in a world governed by the spirits of ancestors and nature gods. Before any major undertaking, they would scorch oracle bones with hot rods, interpreting the resulting cracks as answers from the beyond. The bronze vessels, often commissioned to commemorate a positive divination result, served as permanent, physical thanks to the ancestors for their guidance. The ink here is the absence of bronze, the hollow space of the character that becomes solid metal, preserving the king's piety and power for eternity. While many inscriptions are formulaic, some are tantalizingly unique, referencing events lost to all other history. One famous vessel, the Lingyi, records a military campaign against a people called the Gui Fang. The details of this war, its battles and its outcome, are mentioned nowhere else. The inscription is our sole witness. Another, the Dayu Ding, contains a lengthy narrative of a royal charge and a warning to future generations to uphold the law. These texts are not just historical records, they are the only surviving voices from specific days in the Shang court, events so significant to those involved that they immortalized them in the most durable medium they possessed. The mystery lies in the gaps. Who exactly were the Gui Fang? What was the full story behind the royal warning? The bronze tells us something happened, but the context has evaporated, leaving us with a monumental clue and no other pieces to the puzzle. The greatest enigma, however, may be the script itself. The characters cast into these bronzes are the direct ancestors of modern Chinese writing, yet over the centuries they evolved. Some early forms are stunningly pictorial, a clear drawing of an elephant, a horse, a man kneeling. Others are more abstract. Scholars can trace this evolution across different vessels, watching as the elephant character simplifies or the sun character solidifies from a circle with a dot into a rectangle. But the driving force behind each specific change, the decision by some unknown scribe to alter a stroke or combine elements, is lost. It was a living script hardening into tradition. The advanced metallurgy that preserved these messages is a marvel in itself. The alloy composition, the precision of the piece mold technique, was so perfect that it defeated time. While the oracle bones used for daily divination were buried and forgotten, these bronze vessels, often interred in elite tombs, survived millennia of corrosion. Their inscriptions remain as sharp and legible as the day they were cast. They are time capsules not of papyrus or parchment, but of molten thought, capturing the political, religious, and artistic heartbeat of a civilization that believed the right words cast in the right metal could echo through the ages. They succeeded beyond their wildest divinations. While kings cast their decrees in enduring bronze, a revolution was being written in secrets meant to vanish. In the desperate struggle of the American Revolution, General George Washington faced a crippling disadvantage. British forces controlled the seas and the cities, and his own communications were constantly intercepted. To survive, he needed a way to make words disappear. His solution was the Culper spy ring, and their most powerful weapon was an ink that was not there. This was not a grand, permanent record, but a fleeting whisper on paper, a secret hidden in plain sight. The agent known only as Agent 711, a merchant named James J., developed the formula. It was a simple mixture of ferrous sulfate and water, clear and colorless when applied. A spy could write a seemingly innocent letter, a bland update on family health or merchant trade, and between the lines or on the same paper treated with a second chemical, pour out the true message in this sympathetic ink. To the naked eye, the page held only mundane news, but when heated over a candle flame or treated with a specific chemical reagent like sodium carbonate, the invisible writing would darken, emerging as if by magic from the empty paper. The invisible words, however, were just the first layer of deception. Every person, place, and unit had a code name or number. Washington was Agent 711. New York was 727. A British warship might be referred to simply as 3. A typical decoded message might read, 711 request 725 ascertain strength of 3 in 727. This numerical cipher, combined with the invisible ink, created a double lock on every piece of intelligence. One of the ring's most dramatic successes came in 1780. The Culper ring learned that a French fleet sailing to aid the Americans was planning to disembark troops at Newport, Rhode Island. British forces in New York under General Henry Clinton discovered this plan and prepared a devastating ambush. Their entire fleet was being readied to sail out and crush the French before they could land. This information reached the ring's key courier, a brave woman named Anna Strong, who used a simple but ingenious signal system. She would hang a black petticoat on her laundry line to indicate that the ring's boatman was ready for a pickup, and the number of handkerchiefs beside it would pinpoint which of 6 coves he was hiding in. Through this domestic code, the critical message was passed. It was written in invisible ink on what looked like a routine business letter, then carried on a perilous journey through British lines. When Washington received and developed the message, he saw the catastrophe about to unfold. He immediately launched a brilliant deception. He prepared his own forces as if to attack New York City itself. Clinton, seeing the American army mobilizing toward Manhattan, panicked. Believing his own headquarters were under direct threat, he canceled the fleet's sailing order and recalled his troops to defend the city. The French fleet arrived safely at Newport, their forces intact. A major disaster was averted not by a winning battle, but by a few lines of text that had been, for all intents and purposes, nothing but blank space on a page. The secrecy was so absolute that even Washington did not know the true identities of all his agents, referring to them only by their numbers. This was ink that existed in two states, first as intention, then as fleeting, actionable truth before fading back into history. It changed the course of a war not through permanence, but through perfect, controlled impermanence. The most powerful writing is not always what endures. Sometimes it is what appears only when the world most needs to see it, and then vanishes without a trace. Fire and ink have a complicated relationship in history. While Washington's spies used heat to reveal secrets, another fire acted as a perfect, terrible vault. In the year 79, the volcanic fury of Mount Vesuvius did not just bury the Roman towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum in ash. It baked an entire library into abstract sculpture. In a luxurious villa believed to belong to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, hundreds of papyrus scrolls were stored in cabinets awaiting a reader. Then a pyroclastic surge of superheated gas exceeding 300 degrees Celsius blasted through the rooms. The scrolls did not burn to ash. They were carbonized in an instant, turned into fragile, blackened lumps resembling lumps of charcoal. To the naked eye, they are complete mysteries, their pages fused into a solid, brittle mass. Any attempt at physical unrolling would reduce them to dust. For centuries, these carbonized scrolls were beautiful, heartbreaking artifacts, their contents seemingly lost forever. The ink, however, performed a miracle of preservation. The volcanic heat carbonized the papyrus and the ink simultaneously, fixing the carbon-based ink letters into the carbonized papyrus matrix. In essence, the writing became part of the material itself, locked in a stable state for nearly 2,000 years. The tragedy of their burial became the very reason they survived at all. The challenge was how to see the writing trapped inside. Early attempts were disastrous, involving mechanical unrolling that often shattered the scrolls. Then came a digital revolution. Scientists began using multi-spectral imaging, bathing the scrolls in different wavelengths of light. Some frequencies of infrared light, for instance, can pass through the top layer of carbonized papyrus and be absorbed by the slightly different carbon signature of the ink, making the letters suddenly appear in stark contrast. It was like finding a way to see a shadow inside a shadow. But for the most tightly wound, completely fused scrolls, an even more advanced technology was needed. Enter X-ray phase contrast tomography. Think of it as a superpowered medical CT scan, but for ancient documents. Instead of just measuring density, it detects subtle variations in how X-rays are refracted as they pass through different materials. The minute difference between the carbonized papyrus and the carbonized ink creates a tiny phase shift in the X-ray beam. Advanced algorithms can then map these shifts, virtually segmenting each crushed, coiled layer of the scroll and reconstructing it in 3 dimensions on a screen. Researchers can then digitally flatten the virtual sheet, revealing lines of text that no human eye has seen since the Roman Republic. The potential content is the stuff of scholarly dreams. This villa's library was a philosopher's collection, likely containing lost works from giants of Greek and Latin thought. We could recover missing dialogues of Aristotle, whose writings on comedy and other subjects are gone. We might find more poetry from Sappho, the famed lyricist from the island of Lesbos, of whose work only fragments survive. There could be unknown historical texts, scientific treatises, or early Roman political manifestos. Every successfully scanned scroll is a lottery ticket to a lost chapter of human intellectual history. The paradox is profound. Vesuvius, an agent of utter destruction, became an accidental archivist. Its fire created a time capsule of carbon, preserving words by fusing them with their pages. The knowledge was not stolen, but placed in a safe so perfect we are only now, with 21st century technology, learning how to pick the lock. Each scroll is a message from the heart of a catastrophe, waiting to tell us not about death, but about the life of the mind that flourished before the mountain spoke. What forgotten idea, what beautiful line of poetry is waiting inside that blackened lump, finally ready to be read in the light of a new day? The silent, carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum represent a mystery of preservation where nature itself became an archivist. But what happens when an artifact's very survival seems too perfect, when it arrives not from a controlled excavation but from the shadowy world of the antiquities market, bearing a message that could rewrite religious history? This is the storm surrounding the lead codices of Jordan. In 2007, a cache of objects emerged from a cave in northern Jordan near the border with Israel. They were not scrolls or tablets, but tiny, credit card-sized books, each made of lead pages bound together with lead rings. Their surfaces are covered in crude, stamped images and lines of text in a script that resembles ancient Hebrew or Aramaic. The imagery is instantly evocative to anyone familiar with early Christian and Jewish symbolism. You can make out palm trees, a seven-branched menorah, and figures that some interpret as Jesus and his disciples. The text, where it can be tentatively read, includes names like Simon and James and references to a Messiah. The claim made by those who first brought them to light was earth-shattering. These were not just ancient texts, they were personal diaries or perhaps even the earliest known Christian documents, created by the followers of Jesus in the decades immediately after his crucifixion. If authentic, they would be a discovery on par with the Dead Sea Scrolls, offering a direct, first-hand window into the birth of Christianity, written not on perishable papyrus but on durable metal for eternity. The initial excitement, however, quickly curdled into one of the fiercest and most acrimonious debates in modern archaeology. The central question is brutally simple. Are these codices genuine first-century relics or an elaborate modern forgery designed to exploit faith and scholarship? The battle lines were drawn around the ink of the inscriptions, which in this case is not an applied pigment but the marks themselves, the grooves and impressions stamped into the soft lead. Proponents of authenticity point to the patina, the layer of natural corrosion that forms on ancient metal over centuries. They argue that this patina covers the inscriptions uniformly, proving the marks are as old as the metal itself. The script, they say, matches a form of Proto-Hebrew used 2,000 years ago, and the binding rings show ancient wear. The imagery, while crude, fits the artistic style of the period. To them, the codices are a miraculous survival hidden in a cave for millennia. The skeptics, including most leading experts in ancient metallurgy and Semitic scripts, see a constellation of red flags. They argue the patina could be artificially induced with chemicals in a matter of weeks, not millennia. The script, upon closer inspection, is a messy pastiche. It mixes letter forms from different centuries and regions in ways no authentic ancient scribe ever would, like writing a modern document using a random mix of medieval Gothic script and contemporary cursive. The illustrations are similarly anachronistic, borrowing motifs from known artifacts but assembling them with a clumsy, modern sensibility. The very format, the bound book or codex, was exceedingly rare in the 1st century, especially for metal. Papyrus or parchment scrolls were the norm. The lead rings, some note, show tool marks consistent with modern wire cutters, not ancient smithing techniques. The debate is poisoned by the codices' provenance. They were not uncovered by a scientific archaeological dig. They surfaced through black market channels, their exact find spot obscured. This lack of clear context is the hallmark of forgeries, allowing the objects to be judged in isolation, free from the soil layers and companion artifacts that would confirm their age. Each side views the other with deep suspicion. Believers accuse the academic establishment of being closed-minded, of rejecting a discovery that challenges orthodox timelines and narratives. Scholars accuse the believers of being duped by a sophisticated hoax, one that preys on the profound desire to touch the physical roots of faith. The lead itself is the mute witness. In a laboratory, metal can be tested, corrosion products can be analyzed, but even scientific tests can be contested, and interpretations swayed by pre-existing belief. The lead codices of Jordan sit at a painful intersection. They represent either a historic treasure of unimaginable significance or a cynical fraud of remarkable craftsmanship. They force us to ask a difficult question about mysterious ink. When a message seems to offer everything we might hope to find, how do we separate the whisper of history from the echo of our own desires? The desire to erase a sacred text seems unthinkable, yet it was once a common act of devotion driven by sheer necessity. In the world of medieval manuscripts, parchment made from animal skin was a commodity of immense value, sometimes worth more than the labor of the scribe. When a book fell out of use or when fresh material was desperately needed, the old ink was carefully scraped away, the page was washed and smoothed, and a new text was written over the ghost of the old. This recycled manuscript is called a palimpsest, a word from Greek meaning scraped again. To the naked eye, the new writing is all that exists, but beneath it, often hidden for centuries, lies a first story, a shadow text waiting for its voice to return. One of the most poignant examples of this is a particular Armenian gospel book, a beautiful volume of the biblical texts created with care and reverence. For generations, readers saw only its elegant script and vivid illuminations. Then, scholars turned an ultraviolet lamp upon its margins. What glowed back at them was not decoration but confession. Faint cursive lines of writing appeared, prayers and personal notes scribbled in the blank spaces by the very monks who had copied the holy words. These were not part of the official text. They were private, penitent whispers from the scribe to God, written in an ink that had been deliberately made to vanish. The technique was simple. A scribe could write a temporary note using milk, citrus juice like lemon, or even urine. These organic fluids would dry clear, becoming invisible to the eye, but the chemical alteration they caused to the parchment, the slight degradation of the collagen fibers, remained. Under ultraviolet light, these areas fluoresce differently than the untouched parchment, causing the invisible ink to appear as a dark, ghostly script. In the margins of this Armenian gospel, those resurrected words revealed a human soul at work. A scribe might write a plea for forgiveness for the mistakes he feared he had made while copying. Another might ask for strength to finish the arduous task or for protection for his monastery. These are not the grand theological declarations of the Church Fathers. They are the quiet, humble anxieties of a craftsman engaged in holy work, afraid his own human frailty might taint the divine message he was tasked with preserving. He used a disappearing ink because the note was for God and himself alone, a momentary sigh etched into the eternity of the gospel. The practice of creating palimpsests, however, goes far beyond secret notes. Often, the entire original text was scraped away to make room for something new. For centuries, the only way to detect these underlying texts was through painstaking scrutiny, looking for places where the old ink, imperfectly erased, stained through, or where the scribe's knife had left telltale grooves. Today, technology like multispectral imaging acts as a time machine. By photographing a page under many different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared, and using algorithms to combine the images, scientists can separate the spectral fingerprint of the original iron gall ink from the newer ink above it. The older writing literally rises to the surface on a computer screen, a ghost emerging from the digital depths. This has led to spectacular recoveries. A medieval prayer book in a European library was found to be written over the only known copy of a lost work by the ancient Greek scientist Archimedes. Another palimpsest revealed a previously unknown ancient Greek comedy. In Syria, a manuscript overwritten with saints' lives was found to contain, underneath, a rare early translation of the Gospels into Old Arabic. Each discovery is a literary resurrection, a second chance for a text that was considered obsolete, scraped clean, and buried under another layer of history. The Armenian scribe's invisible prayer and the recycled parchment of a palimpsest speak to the same profound truth. They show us that writing is never just about the message that endures. It is also about the messages that were meant to fade, the private thoughts, the outdated knowledge, the texts that were literally sacrificed so that new words could live. The ink we see tells one story, the ghost ink beneath it now whispering back through the lens of a camera or the glow of an ultraviolet lamp tells another, often more intimate one. It reminds us that history is written in layers, and sometimes the most honest voice is the one that was never meant to be heard by anyone but its author, or by us centuries later, listening in the dark with a new kind of light. From the ghostly whispers of palimpsests, we arrive at a mystery born not from antiquity, but from the modern age, a book that fabricates its own reality with stunning conviction. In the late 1970s, Italian artist Luigi Serafini embarked on a project of pure, unbridled invention. For 3 years, he filled page after page, creating the Codex Serafinianus, a lavish encyclopedia of a world that does not exist. This is not a recovered artifact. It is a deliberate, contemporary creation designed to baffle and enchant. The book is written entirely in an elegant, flowing script of unknown characters, a beautiful cipher for no language. Its true power, however, lies in the illustrations rendered in rich, vibrant ink. The ink work is masterful, shifting from delicate watercolor washes to precise line drawings, all depicting the impossible. You will see botanical diagrams of plants that grow into chairs or shed tears of blood. Zoological charts feature fish shaped like violins and creatures that are part plant, part animal, locked in surreal life cycles. Architectural and mechanical drawings show elaborate, nonsensical devices, machines whose purpose is both hinted at and completely obscured by their own intricate, useless beauty. Human figures engage in rituals that defy logic, like couples turning into alligators or people playing games with impossible geometry. The ink does not just illustrate this world, it breathes life into its internal, consistent madness. For decades, scholars and enthusiasts have treated the Codex like another Voynich Manuscript, applying cryptographic analysis to its script, searching for patterns and a hidden key. But the author himself has offered a startling clarification. Luigi Serafini has stated that the writing is not a cipher at all. It is a form of automatic writing, a stream of consciousness outpouring meant to mimic the visual experience of language for someone who cannot read it. The characters have the shape and flow of writing with punctuation and paragraph breaks, but they carry no literal, translatable meaning. They are a performance of language, not a vehicle for it. This revelation transforms the mystery entirely. The Codex Serafinianus is not a puzzle to be solved, but an experience to be felt. Its purpose is artistic, not cryptographic. It masterfully recreates the sensation we encountered with the Voynich or the Phaistos disc, that profound frustration and wonder of facing a text that seems to hold profound knowledge yet denies access. Serafini bottled that specific emotion and presented it as art. He invites us to feel like a child or an explorer from another time, holding a book from an alien culture where every diagram is both strangely familiar and utterly incomprehensible. The ink becomes a tool for empathy, forcing us to confront our own need to decode, to categorize, to understand. What does it mean when the mystery is the point? The Codex asks us to let go of the hunt for a single answer and instead wander through its pages, allowing the bizarre beauty and the sheer inventiveness to wash over us. It is a celebration of curiosity for its own sake, a monument to the human desire to create systems and meanings, even if those systems are beautiful, self-contained lies. In a world obsessed with answers, the Codex Serafinianus is a rare and precious thing, a mystery that openly admits it has no solution, and in doing so becomes a perfect mirror for our own endless wonder. While Serafini's codex invents a universe, another manuscript maps our own with breathtaking, ancient accuracy. Tucked away in a sealed cave library along the Silk Road, among tens of thousands of scrolls and paintings, was a single sheet of paper that would rewrite the history of science. This is the Dunhuang Star Atlas, and its ink is a bridge to the 7th century night sky. Drawn with fine brushes and meticulous care, it presents the heavens not as a mythical tapestry, but as a precise, practical chart. 12 detailed panels fan out, each depicting the visible stars and constellations for a different month of the year. The artist used 3 distinct colors of ink to classify the stars, a systematic code. Black dots for the stars of one ancient catalog, red for another, and white for particularly important stars. In total, it charts the positions of over 1,300 individual stars. The accuracy is startling. Constellations like the Big Dipper are rendered in recognizable patterns that align with modern astronomical charts, proving these were not symbolic drawings but records of direct, careful observation. This document, created around the year 650, is the oldest known complete star atlas in the world, and its sophistication poses a profound mystery. How did astronomers of the Tang dynasty achieve this precision centuries before similar systematic maps appeared in Europe? The answer lies in a long, unbroken tradition of celestial observation that was a matter of state security. Chinese emperors believed the heavens directly reflected their mandate to rule. Unusual celestial events like comets or novas were omens that could signal divine displeasure. Therefore, court astronomers were not just stargazers, they were highly trained bureaucrats tasked with constant, meticulous surveillance of the sky. They used sophisticated instruments like armillary spheres for measuring star positions and giant Gnomon sundials for tracking the sun's path. Observations were recorded nightly, compiled into official records, and cross-checked by different officials to prevent error. The ink on the Dunhuang Atlas is the culmination of that rigorous, state-sponsored science. It was likely a reference tool, perhaps for an astronomer or a student, translating years of accumulated data into a portable visual guide. The mystery deepens when we consider its purpose beyond the court. The atlas was found in the Buddhist cave complex of Mogao, a place of meditation and scripture. This suggests a fascinating fusion. Buddhist monks were also keen astronomers, using the stars for calendar keeping and ritual timing. The atlas represents a moment where imperial science and spiritual practice converged, where understanding the cosmos was part of understanding one's place within it. The ink lines connecting the stars do not just form pictures, they trace the pathways of an ordered universe, one that could be predicted, mapped, and respected. This single sheet of paper, preserved by the dry desert air for over a millennium, silently disproves the notion that scientific cartography of the heavens was a purely European endeavor. It shows us a parallel path of discovery where ink and brush achieved a clarity of vision that would not be matched elsewhere for hundreds of years. It asks us to look up at the same stars and remember that the drive to map the unknown is a human constant, and sometimes the most advanced technology is simply a steady hand, a keen eye, and the will to record what you see in permanent, perfect ink. The precision of the Dunhuang Star Atlas mapped a knowable cosmos, but some ancient ink was designed to harness forces far beyond human understanding. Carved into the plaster of a Pompeii column, scratched onto a medieval church wall, and inked onto fragile papyrus amulets, a simple 5-word grid has echoed through the centuries. It reads the same forwards, backwards, up and down Satyr Aripo tenet opera rotas. This is the Satyr square, a perfect palindrome, and its symmetrical magic is as potent today as it was 2,000 years ago. The words are Latin, but their collective meaning has never been settled. A crude translation might be, the sower Aripo holds the wheels with care, but who is the sower? What is an Aripo? The sentence is grammatical nonsense, yet its geometric perfection feels deeply intentional. This was not casual graffiti. This was ink deployed as a shield. The square's power lies in its unbreakable symmetry. The central word, tenet, forms a cross that anchors the entire design, a pivot point around which the other letters revolve in flawless order. This visual harmony was interpreted as a kind of cosmic balance, a written charm that could influence reality. People believed that by inscribing these letters, they were etching a piece of eternal order onto a chaotic world. Archaeologists have found it inked on parchment and folded into tiny lockets to be worn around the neck. They have found it painted above doorways in Roman houses, a guardian over the threshold. After the eruption of Vesuvius preserved one example, the square migrated into the medieval world, appearing on church walls and in monastic manuscripts, its pagan letters absorbed into a new Christian context. This migration sparked one of the most enduring theories. If you rearrange the letters of the 5 words, they can be made to form the Pater Noster, Our Father, the first words of the Lord's Prayer in Latin. The remaining letters, A and O, could stand for Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end from the Book of Revelation. To believers, this was no coincidence. The Satyr Square became a secret sign for early Christians persecuted by Rome, a coded declaration of faith hidden in plain sight on a city wall. It was a brilliant narrative, but modern scholarship casts doubt. The earliest known square was found in Pompeii, destroyed decades before widespread Christian persecution began. While the letter rearrangement works, it requires a very modern, anagrammatic way of thinking that may not reflect ancient use. So if not a Christian cipher, what was it? Perhaps it was exactly what it appears to be, a powerful incantation. The nonsense of the words might be the point. In magical practice, often the potency of a charm comes from its sound, its rhythm, and its mysteriousness, not its literal meaning. Repeating the square, writing it over and over, could have been a ritual act to ward off illness, protect a home from evil spirits, or ensure a good harvest. Aripo might be a name, or it might be a nonsense word that completed the magical pattern. The farmer chanting over his field, the mother inking it for her sick child, the soldier carving it on his shield. They may not have needed a translation. They felt its power in the repetition, in the perfect, revolving dance of the letters. The Satyr Square endures because it is a blank slate for belief. Its ink is a container. For a Roman, it held the power of a pagan charm. For a medieval monk, it might hold the secret of the cross. For a modern viewer, it holds the fascinating puzzle of a perfect code. The true purpose of the person who first arranged those 25 letters in that 5x5 grid may be lost, but the human impulse that preserved it is crystal clear. We see a pattern that feels significant, a symmetry that resonates with our desire for order, and we cannot help but believe it must mean something profound. The square asks us whether the power of ink lies in the message it conveys or in the faith of the person who reads it. The power of a pattern lies in its repetition, but what if the pattern itself is a language we have forgotten how to see? Long before the Satyr Square, in the dusty plains of ancient Iran, clerks were pressing the first records of commerce into soft clay. This is the Proto-Elamite script, and its thousands of tablets form a silent symphony of early bureaucracy. Created around 3,000 years before the Common Era, it is one of the planet's very first writing systems, emerging alongside the cuneiform of neighboring Sumer. Yet while cuneiform was eventually cracked, revealing epics and law codes, the Proto-Elamite signs have stubbornly guarded their meaning. The ink here is again the impression of a stylus, a wedge-shaped reed pressed into moist clay to create a permanent record that would then bake hard in the sun. These tablets are not grand narratives, they are inventories, lists, and accounts. The signs are a mix of recognizable pictographs, a head, a cow, a jar, and, more abundantly, a system of numerical notations, circles, semicircles, and wedges representing different units and quantities. You can almost hear the scratch of the stylus, see the clerk's hands moving methodically, counting sacks of grain, heads of livestock, and measures of oil for a central administration that needed to keep track of its wealth. The mystery is not a lack of evidence. We have over 1,600 of these tablets. The problem is the nature of the evidence itself. The script seems to be a true writing system, capable of recording language, not just numbers. But it lacks the very thing that allowed us to decipher other ancient tongues, a bilingual text or a clear link to a known language. Scholars are not even certain what language the script represents. Was it an early form of Elamite, a language we know from later cuneiform inscriptions, or was it something else entirely, spoken by a people whose identity is lost? Without this linguistic anchor, the signs float in a sea of ambiguity. Furthermore, the pictographs quickly became abstract. The drawing of a cow evolved into a few simple wedges that no longer resembled an animal at all. This abstraction was a step toward efficiency, but for us, it severs the direct link between the symbol and the thing it once pictured. We see a sign that might mean goat, but we cannot prove it, and we certainly cannot hear the word the ancient clerk said in his head as he pressed it into the clay. If we could read these impressions, the window they would open is remarkably specific and profoundly important. This was not the script of poets or priests, at least not in these surviving records. This was the script of accountants and warehouse managers. A single deciphered tablet would not reveal a creation myth. It would reveal the tax rate on barley, or the standard ration for a temple worker, or the trading relationship between a highland village and a lowland administrative center. It would show us the gears of a state apparatus in motion, a complex economy operating at the dawn of civilization. Were these records from a centralized, coercive state demanding tribute from surrounding communities? Or do they reflect a more collaborative network of trade and redistribution? The numbers themselves tell a partial story. The system is sophisticated, using different numerical signs for counting different types of items. Discrete objects like jars versus measures of grain, suggesting a highly developed concept of quantity and value. The tablets are formatted with clear separations, columns, and headings, indicating a standardized practice, a curriculum that scribes had to learn. This is the quiet agony of the Proto-Elamite script. We hold the very spreadsheets of a 4,000-year-old civilization. We can see the columns, the totals, the careful notations. We can sense the immense practical intelligence at work, the need to organize, to plan, to control resources on a scale that required writing to manage. But we cannot read the labels on the columns. We are left with the skeleton of an economy, the numerical bones, but without the flesh of the words that gave it meaning, the names of the people, the places, the specific commodities, and the transactions that wove a society together. It is a reminder that the first drive to write may not have been to sing of gods or heroes, but to answer the most pragmatic of questions: who owes what to whom, and where is it all stored? The ink on these clay tablets is the birth certificate of administration itself, a silent testament to the moment humanity realized that memory was too fragile to trust with the harvest, and that some impressions needed to be made permanent. The quiet accounting of the Proto-Elamite script speaks of a world organizing itself, but our next document promised to reorganize history itself. In a Yale University library, a map drawn on aged parchment seemed to rewrite the story of a continent. Known as the Vinland map, it depicts the world as medieval Europeans understood it, with Europe, Africa, and Asia in familiar forms. But in the Northwest Atlantic, it shows something astonishing: a large, rugged island labeled Vinland. According to Norse sagas, Vinland was the name Leif Erikson gave to part of North America around the year 1000. If this map was genuine, it was breathtaking proof that Viking knowledge of the New World had been recorded and circulated in Europe centuries before Columbus sailed. The ink, a brown iron gall, stained the parchment with a line that could shatter a historical paradigm. The map's emergence in 1957, just as scholars were re-evaluating the Norse sagas, felt like a miraculous discovery. Its supporters pointed to the parchment, which was physically bound into a genuine medieval book, and to the style of the script, which seemed convincingly period. The ink appeared under the microscope to have the right craquelure, the fine cracking pattern of an ancient medium drying over centuries. For a time, it was celebrated as one of the most important cartographic finds of the 20th century. Then science entered the fray with a devastating claim. In the 1970s, researchers using a new tool, the electron microprobe, analyzed tiny samples of the map's ink. They made a shocking discovery. The black lines contained significant amounts of a synthetic titanium compound called anatase. This particular form of titanium dioxide was not produced as a pure pigment until the 1920s. Its presence suggested the ink was modern, carefully formulated to look old, and applied to genuinely old parchment to create a flawless forgery. The case seemed closed. A forger, perhaps in the early 20th century, had used modern ink to create a historical bombshell, a fake that played perfectly into contemporary fascination with Viking explorers. The map was declared a clever, lucrative hoax, but the story, like the ink itself, proved stubborn. Decades later, new and more sensitive analytical techniques reopened the investigation. A 2002 study argued that the anatase could have come from medieval ink production. Iron gall ink was made by soaking iron scraps in oak gall juice, and the sulfuric acid used in the process could have leached titanium from sand used as an abrasive to clean the parchment. Tiny, natural anatase crystals could have contaminated the ink batch. Furthermore, a 2018 study using spectroscopy found the ink's composition to be consistent with many known medieval inks, with a carbon structure showing centuries of aging. The scientific community is now starkly divided. One camp sees the anatase as an undeniable, anachronistic fingerprint of fraud. The other sees it as an irrelevant contaminant, overshadowed by the broader chemical profile that shouts authenticity. This is no longer just a debate about a map. It is a high-stakes clash between disciplines. Historians and art curators examine the flow of the lines, the phrasing of the Latin text, and the map's relationship to other medieval works. Chemists and materials scientists peer into the atomic structure of the ink particles, arguing over parts per billion of titanium. Forgery experts look for the psychological profile of a potential faker, who had the skill, the motive, and the access to rare parchment in the early 1900s. The ink is the battlefield. Each new analysis is a salvo. The mystery cuts to the core of how we know what we know about the past. If the map is real, it provides a stunning medieval witness to Viking voyages, suggesting their discoveries were not just isolated sagas but information that entered the European geographical imagination. If it is fake, it is a testament to the forger's genius, creating an object so perfectly tuned to our historical desires that it fooled experts for generations. The Vinland map forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the ink is willing, but the science is conflicted. We are left holding a beautiful, tantalizing possibility, unable to decide if it is a window into a forgotten past or a mirror reflecting our own deep need to find one. A nation's script is the soul of its history written down. For Japan, the elegant characters of kanji, borrowed from China, tell a story of cultural exchange and adaptation. But a persistent legend whispers of a different origin, of a pure and ancient script born on the islands long before any foreign influence. This is the mystery of Jindaimoji, the script of the Age of the Gods. Its ink is a claim to a lost indigenous identity. Proponents point to a scattered collection of artifacts. You might see strange symbols carved on stone monuments hidden in Shinto shrines, or inked onto old family scrolls passed down for generations. The characters themselves are a curious mix, some resembling runic letters, others looking like simplified kanji, and many appearing completely unique. They are often presented as a coherent system, a true writing system that recorded the sacred history of Japan's divine age. the time when gods walked the earth and founded the imperial line. If real, these marks would be a seismic discovery, proving Japan developed writing independently, free from the cultural shadow of the mainland. The inscriptions tell tantalizing stories. One famous example, the Hokkaido scroll, depicts symbols alongside a narrative of ancient kings and celestial events. Another, the Teiknauchi documents, is a vast collection of texts supposedly discovered in the 19th century, written in this script and detailing tens of thousands of years of pre-Chinese Japanese history. The ink on these pages, often a suspiciously fresh-looking black against aged paper, promises to rewrite everything. But when subjected to the rigors of historical and linguistic analysis, the entire edifice crumbles. The scholarly consensus is overwhelming and unequivocal. Jindaimoji is not an ancient script. It is a modern creation, a pseudo-history fabricated mostly in the 18th and 19th centuries. The evidence is meticulous. First, there is no archaeological proof. Despite centuries of digging, not a single example of Jindaimoji has ever been found in a secure, datable archaeological context, like a sealed tomb layer from the Yayoi or Kofun periods. Authentic ancient Japanese writing from those times, when it appears, is always in the form of Chinese characters used phonetically to represent Japanese sounds. Second, the script itself is linguistically impossible. The symbols show no logical evolution or standardization across different claimed artifacts. They often include anachronisms, borrowing shapes from much later historical periods or even from other cultures. Most damningly, the script fails the basic test of a writing system. It cannot coherently represent the old Japanese language as linguists have reconstructed it from genuine sources. The grammar, the word order, the sounds, none of it aligns. The various documents contradict each other and known history in countless ways. So why was it created, and why does the myth endure so powerfully? The ink here serves a purpose far deeper than communication. It serves the psyche of a nation. The myth emerged during a period of intense national identity formation, when scholars were looking back to define what made Japan uniquely Japanese, distinct from the overwhelming cultural influence of China. The idea of a pure, divine script offered a powerful symbol. It provided a direct, unbroken written link to the mythical founding of the nation, bypassing the borrowed Chinese characters that recorded actual history. It was a tool for cultural pride and later for nationalist ideology, offering proof of an ancient, superior, and isolated civilization. The physical artifacts themselves, often discovered in dramatic fashion or held secretly by families, add a layer of romantic mystery that resists dry academic debunking. The persistence of Jindaimoji speaks to a universal human longing. It is the desire for a pristine origin story, for a cultural heritage that is wholly one's own, untouched by the messy realities of trade, conquest, and borrowing that actually shape history. The ink marks on those scrolls and stones are more than forgeries. They are a mirror, reflecting the deep-seated need to see one's own reflection in the distant past, even if that reflection has to be carefully drawn by hand. They ask us whether the true power of writing lies in recording truth or in inventing the truth we wish had been recorded. A farmer's plow struck stone in a French field, and a family's quiet life erupted into one of archaeology's most bitter wars. In 1924, 17-year-old Emile Fradin was working his family's land near Glozul when his plow caught on something. He dug down and found a hidden, brick-lined chamber. Inside was not a skeleton or a chest of coins, but a bizarre collection of artifacts that defied all logic. There were smooth, phallic-shaped idols. There were carved bone tools. And there were dozens of clay tablets covered in a script that looked like writing, but from no known time or place. The symbols scratched into the clay were the core of the mystery. They looked vaguely alphabetic, with shapes that reminded scholars of Phoenician letters, of Iberian scripts, even of runes. But these scripts came from different millennia and different continents. Here they were mixed together on the same tablet, as if someone had taken a sampler of ancient alphabets and combined them into a single, impossible text. The ink was the groove itself, the line cut into the unfired clay. Emile and his family were soon inundated. First came curious locals, then journalists, and finally the academics. The archaeological world split into two furious camps. On one side stood the believers, led by a respected doctor and amateur archaeologist named Antonin Morlet. He argued Glozal was a site of staggering importance, a Neolithic sanctuary from perhaps 3,000 years before the Common Era. If he was right, it meant a form of writing existed in Stone Age Western Europe, a discovery that would upend the entire narrative of cultural development, which held that writing arrived much later from the Near East. The tablets, he claimed, were evidence of a lost, sophisticated European civilization. On the other side stood the official archaeological establishment, led by the director of France's National Museum of Antiquities. They denounced Glozal as an obvious, clumsy hoax. The chamber, they said, was a crude modern pit. The idols were indecent fakes, and the writing, it was a pastiche, a nonsensical jumble created by someone with a shallow knowledge of different ancient scripts but no understanding of their historical context. They pointed the finger directly at the Fradin family, implying young Emile had crafted the objects himself to bring fame and tourists to their remote farm. The debate exploded into the Glozal affair, a toxic public battle fought in newspapers and academic journals, filled with accusations of fraud, bad faith, and professional jealousy. It was a class war, pitting established Parisian experts against provincial amateurs. To settle it, science was called in. Over the decades, a battery of tests was performed. Thermoluminescence dating, which measures when clay was last fired, yielded wildly inconsistent results ranging from the medieval period to modern times. Some tests on the bone tools suggested great age, while others indicated they were recent. The scientific data was a muddle, providing ammunition for both sides but a clear verdict for neither. The engravings themselves, the ink of the mystery, were particularly puzzling. Microscopic analysis showed some grooves had the sharp edges of recent carving, while others appeared worn. But was that wear from centuries in the soil or from artificial aging techniques like scrubbing with sand? No one could agree. The Glozal affair never found a resolution. It simply burned out, leaving a field of scorched reputations and unanswered questions. Today, most archaeologists dismiss the site as a hoax, citing the anachronistic script mix and the questionable circumstances of discovery. Yet a small minority of researchers still argue for its authenticity, pointing to those few anomalous scientific dates. The true cautionary tale of Glozal is not about the objects, but about the people who studied them. It reveals how quickly the pursuit of knowledge can become a battle of egos, where the desire to be proven right outweighs the patience required to understand. The inscribed tablets sit in museum drawers, a permanent question mark. They remind us that sometimes the most mysterious thing about an ancient ink is not who made it, but why we are so desperate to believe in it or so quick to condemn it. The bitter debates of Glozal reveal how much we project onto the past, but one discovery arrived with a clarity that shook the foundations of New World history. In a gravel quarry in the Mexican state of Veracruz, workers unearthed a slab of serpentine stone about the size of a laptop, heavy and smooth. Its surface was not blank. It was covered in 62 distinct, elegant symbols carved in rows, a silent text waiting in the dirt. This is the Cascajal block, and its glyphs may be the oldest writing ever found in the Americas. Dated to approximately 900 years before the Common Era, it predates the famous Maya script by nearly a millennium. The ink here is once again the absence of stone, the carefully incised lines that form each character. They are not pictures of gods or animals, but abstract, standardized signs. You see scrolls, dots, arches, and shapes that look like insects or tools, all arranged in clear horizontal rows with individual glyphs sometimes repeated, suggesting a structured sequence, not random decoration. This small slab is a monumental clue left by the Olmec civilization, the so-called mother culture of Mesoamerica. The Olmecs are famous for their colossal stone heads, their mastery of jade, and their cultural influence that later nourished the Maya and the Aztecs. But for all their sophistication, they were thought to be a people without a true writing system, communicating through powerful art and iconography alone. The Cascadule block challenges that idea profoundly. It suggests the Olmecs were not just artists and engineers but scribes. The arrangement is what captivates scholars. The symbols are organized into what appear to be separate clauses or phrases, separated by small lines. Some glyphs are clearly repeated in different rows, a hallmark of a writing system reusing a set of standard signs to form different statements. It looks like writing, it feels like writing, but is it? The debate hinges on a crucial distinction. Is this true writing, a system that can fully record spoken language, allowing you to read a sentence aloud? Or is it proto-writing, a system of symbols that convey ideas, names, or ownership without capturing the full flow of speech, like the icons on a modern road sign? The block's solitary nature is the core of the mystery. Unlike the Indus Valley script where we have thousands of short inscriptions, the Cascadule block stands alone. No other artifact with this specific script has ever been found. Without more examples, we cannot see how the symbols combine, we cannot find patterns of grammar, we cannot begin to guess a meaning. It is a single page from a lost library, and we have no other pages for comparison. Some experts look at the glyphs and see a precursor to later Mesoamerican scripts, a direct ancestor. They point out that a few symbols bear a striking resemblance to much later Maya day signs, suggesting a cultural thread of meaning that persisted for centuries. Others are more cautious. They propose the block might be a unique ritual object, perhaps a kind of sacred score for a chant or a ceremony, where the symbols prompted a performance rather than recorded a specific linguistic statement. Yet, even if it is proto-writing, its implications are staggering. It pushes the invention of complex symbolic notation in the Americas back by hundreds of years. It means that in the lush rainforests and along the river basins of ancient Veracruz, alongside the carving of giant heads, Olmec elites were experimenting with the representation of language itself. They were codifying knowledge in a durable form, moving beyond imagery toward abstraction. The block hints at a lost literary or administrative tradition that used perishable materials, carved gourds, painted bark paper, or incised wood, all of which have vanished in the humid climate. The stone slab survived precisely because it was stone, a heavy, permanent notebook that outlasted every other page, so we are left with a beautiful, silent oracle. The Cascadule block does not just ask us to decipher its 62 signs, it asks us to reimagine an entire civilization. Were the Olmecs speaking to each other across the centuries in a language of stone, and have we only just found the first word? The ink here is the shadow in the groove, and it casts a very long shadow indeed, one that stretches from the dawn of Mesoamerican culture all the way to our own uncertain understanding. Gold was not the only treasure hidden in the alchemist's workshop. In dimly lit chambers across medieval and Renaissance Europe, scholars toiled over manuscripts where the ink itself seemed to partake in the great work. These were not straightforward recipes. They were labyrinths of allegory, filled with fantastical beasts, celestial marriages, and dying kings, all rendered in vibrant inks and cryptic verse. To reveal the secrets of transmutation plainly was considered dangerous, even blasphemous. The knowledge had to be cloaked, accessible only to those with the spiritual and intellectual key. This was a world where ink was both a veil and a revelation. Among the most stunning examples are the Ripley Scrolls, long, illustrated manuscripts named for the 15th century English alchemist George Ripley. Unfurled, a scroll can stretch over 5 meters, a breathtaking procession of vivid ink and watercolor imagery. You see a green lion devouring the sun, a dragon eating its own tail, a king and queen dissolving in a bath only to be reborn. Interwoven with the pictures are rhyming couplets equally opaque. The green lion in flamy fire fries the sun, one line reads, and the moon melts for woe when he hath her won. To the uninitiated, it is a beautiful, nonsensical fairy tale. To the alchemist, every image, every color of ink was a precise symbol in a coded technical manual. The green lion often represented a corrosive acid like nitric or sulfuric, capable of dissolving metals, the sun. The bath was the alembic, the vessel for distillation. The dragon biting its tail, the Ouroboros, symbolized the cyclical, self-consuming nature of the process. The ink did not just describe the work, it performed it symbolically on the page. This symbolic language served a profound dual purpose. First, it was a shield. Alchemists operated in a perilous space between sanctioned scholarship and heresy. Claiming you could make gold could attract the wrath of a king demanding results, or the suspicion of the church for meddling in divine natural order. By writing in riddles, they protected themselves. Only a fellow philosopher, one who had undergone the necessary moral and intellectual purification, could hope to understand. Second, and more importantly, the allegory was the science. Alchemists believed the transformation of base metal into gold was mirrored by the transformation of the alchemist's own soul. The laboratory process and the spiritual journey were one and the same. The death and resurrection of the king in the illustration was both the chemical process of purification and the mystic's path to enlightenment. The ink had to carry this double meaning, this fusion of matter and spirit. So when a modern chemist today pores over a digitized Ripley scroll, they are not hunting for a formula to create wealth. They are performing a different kind of transmutation, turning allegory back into laboratory practice. They decode the green lion as a specific reagent, the bath as a described temperature. In doing so, they uncover the birth pangs of modern chemistry. These inked recipes document the discovery of mineral acids, the purification of metals, and early understandings of chemical reactions, all recorded in the only language the authors had that could contain both their empirical observations and their philosophical beliefs. The mysterious inks of the alchemists thus hold a unique place in our story. They were deliberately designed to obscure, yet they preserve with remarkable fidelity the first clumsy, brilliant steps of experimental science. They remind us that sometimes the deepest truths are not hidden in a code meant to be broken, but in a symbol meant to be lived, a process where the seeker and the secret are transformed together. Stone can hold a secret as stubbornly as any locked book. On the grounds of Shugborough Hall, an elegant English estate, a simple shepherd's monument stands in a quiet garden. It is a marble carving, a pastoral scene copied from a famous painting by Nicholas Poussin. 3 figures tend a tomb, their postures serene and timeless. But below this idyllic scene is an inscription that has transfixed and baffled visitors for over 250 years. Carved deeply into the stone is the sequence of letters OUOSVAVV, framed prominently between 2 capital Ds. This is not weathered text from a lost civilization. It is a crisp, deliberate puzzle left in the heart of the Staffordshire countryside, a riddle in plain sight meant for someone or perhaps for no one at all. The letters themselves offer no immediate clue. They are not a known acronym, and they resist any obvious anagram in English. This very emptiness has made them a perfect vessel for speculation, attracting theories that range from the romantic to the earth-shattering. The simplest explanation is a coded love note. The monument was commissioned by Thomas Anson, a member of the estate's family, and some believe the letters are a cipher for a heartfelt dedication to a lost love, a private sentiment made permanent but opaque to the public eye. Others have looked to Latin, the scholarly language of the era. Could it be an abbreviated phrase? One popular suggestion reads it as a dedication to a biblical figure, perhaps from the book of Luke. Yet another theory, far more grandiose, connects the monument to the legend of the Holy Grail. The original Poussin painting is itself a favorite of conspiracy theorists who believe it holds clues to a hidden treasure, and some insist the Shugborough inscription is a literal map, with the letters pointing to the location of the Holy Grail itself, supposedly buried somewhere on the estate grounds. The mystery's allure is proven by the caliber of minds it has ensnared. This was not just a local curiosity. The great novelist Charles Dickens pondered it during his visits to the area, turning the letters over in a mind that crafted intricate plots of its own. The naturalist Charles Darwin, a man who decoded the very story of life, also tried his hand at cracking this short code during a stay at Shugborough and was equally stumped. In the 20th century, the professionals arrived, codebreakers from Bletchley Park, the brilliant minds who shattered the Nazi Enigma cipher, applied their formidable skills to this 8-letter sequence after the war. They treated it with the same analytical rigor they used on wartime communications, running it through statistical models and pattern recognition. Yet even these masters of decryption came up empty-handed. The inscription yielded nothing. That is the enduring charm of the Shugborough inscription. It lacks the world-shaking weight of a lost gospel or a sunken treasure map. It is a genteel, garden-variety enigma. The ink, here is the shadow in the carved letters, catching the English sun and rain for centuries. It represents a mystery for mystery's sake, an intellectual game set in stone by an 18th-century gentleman, perhaps with a twinkle in his eye. It asks a quieter question than our earlier artifacts. Not, what profound truth are you hiding, but simply, what do I mean? In a world of grand historical conspiracies and ancient secrets, there is something wonderfully human about this unsolved puzzle on a country estate. It reminds us that the urge to encode, to play, to leave a mark that whispers but does not speak, is not just for spies and prophets. Sometimes it is for a shepherd in a garden, guarding a secret that may be nothing more than a private joke or a beautiful question meant to echo forever, unanswered, in the peaceful green heart of England. The king and queen dissolving in their alchemical bath were not just chemical reactants, they were a marriage. This is the heart of the chemical wedding, one of the most profound symbols in the mystic's arsenal. Illustrated with loving care in vibrant inks, it shows the union of sulfur, the masculine principle, with mercury, the feminine principle. Their marriage in the sealed vessel gives birth to the philosophical child, the hermaphroditic rebis, representing the perfected matter and the unified self. Every drop of colored ink in these scenes was a meditation on duality and unity, on the reconciliation of opposites within the crucible of the soul. This symbolic language, so dense with layered meaning, found an unlikely interpreter centuries later in the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. He did not see these manuscripts as failed recipes for gold, but as breathtakingly accurate maps of the human unconscious. Jung argued that the alchemist, toiling in his laboratory, was unconsciously projecting the processes of his own psyche onto the materials. The quest for the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, was an externalized search for wholeness, for what Jung called individuation. The Ouroboros, the dragon eating its own tail, became a perfect symbol of the self-sustaining cycle of the psyche, of integrating the shadow. The death and resurrection of the king mirrored the necessary ego death required for psychological transformation. In Jung's view, the alchemist's ink was recording a dream, a collective dream of transformation that predated modern psychology by centuries. The symbols were not mere code, they were the native language of the deep mind. This psychological lens is powerful, but it is only half the story. A parallel revolution was occurring in the history of science. Modern scholars, armed with a deep understanding of both period language and practical chemistry, began to retranslate these fantastical texts. They approached the green lion not as a mythical beast but as a technical term. And a remarkable thing happened. The allegories began to yield precise laboratory instructions. That green lion devouring the sun, it is a vivid description of aqua regia, a mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acid, so named for its ability to dissolve the king of metals, gold. The many-headed serpent might refer to the multiple distillations required to purify a substance. The sequence of colors, the blackening, the whitening, the yellowing, and finally the reddening described with poetic fervor, maps exactly onto observable chemical states during the purification of metals like the calcination of lead. The alchemists' coded ink, it turns out, was a meticulous lab notebook. They were describing real procedures, but in the only conceptual framework they had, one that blended empirical observation with spiritual philosophy. They were the first experimentalists, noting yields, describing reaction times, and troubleshooting failed experiments, all while believing they were participating in a divine mystery. Their mysticism was their methodology, so when we look at a Ripley scroll today, we are seeing a palimpsest of human endeavor. The first layer is a spiritual autobiography, a map of inner transformation as valid as any modern therapeutic diagram. The second layer, shining through it, is the birth certificate of chemistry itself. The careful notes on how to control fire, how to isolate acids, how to observe phase changes. That ink dragon circling the flask is both a monster from the depths of the mind and a precise diagram of a reflux condenser. This is the ultimate redemption of the alchemist's ink. It was never mere superstition. It was a dual record written in a language of symbol that could hold two profound truths at once: the truth of the soul's journey and the truth of the material world's behavior, waiting for a future that would learn to separate the two, and in doing so, discover that both were valid paths to understanding the nature of change itself. The battle over the Vinland map is fought not in archives but in laboratories where a single drop of ink is placed under the electron microscope. In the 1970s, a team of researchers used a powerful new tool to analyze the map's brown line. They were searching for the chemical fingerprint of medieval iron gall ink, a mixture of oak gall tannins and iron salts. Instead, they found anatase. This specific crystalline form of titanium dioxide was a shock. It was a synthetic pigment, a product of 20th century industrial chemistry, not something a medieval scribe would have possessed. The conclusion seemed inescapable. The ink was modern, carefully formulated to mimic the look of age, then applied to genuinely old parchment. The map was declared a brilliant, audacious fake, a verdict that stood for decades. The case was closed, the historical promise revoked by cold, hard science. But science, like history, is subject to reinterpretation. Decades later, a new investigation began, armed with even more sensitive technology. In 2018, a team from Yale and the University of California examined the map using Raman spectroscopy and other non-destructive techniques. This time, they looked at the ink's entire chemical profile, not just for anatase. They found a complex mixture rich in carbon, iron, and other elements perfectly consistent with known medieval ink recipes. The carbon structure showed the molecular aging expected from centuries of existence. Their argument flipped the script. The anatase they proposed was not proof of a modern ink but a trace contaminant. It could have come from the sand used to smooth the parchment centuries ago, or even from a modern conservation effort where a tiny amount of modern titanium white pigment accidentally touched the surface during analysis or storage. In this reading, the ink is overwhelmingly medieval, with a minuscule, irrelevant speck of the modern world clinging to it. The physical evidence of the parchment itself adds another layer of intrigue. Radiocarbon dating places the animal skin firmly in the 15th century, exactly the right period. Even more compelling are the wormholes. The map sheet has a distinct, irregular pattern of tiny holes left by bookworms as they burrowed through the parchment. This pattern is not random. It has been meticulously matched hole for hole to the wormhole patterns in a genuine medieval manuscript known as the Speculum Historiale. The two pieces of parchment were once bound together in the same book. This is powerful, almost poetic evidence. A forger would have to acquire a blank sheet of 15th century parchment, then somehow artificially create a set of wormholes that perfectly, miraculously align with the holes in a specific known book. The odds seem astronomically against it, so we are left with a courtroom drama where each side presents formidable evidence. The prosecution points to the annotace, the anachronistic fingerprint they say proves fraud beyond a reasonable doubt. They ask, why would a modern contaminant be found only in the ink lines and not elsewhere on the parchment? They argue the map's sudden, convenient appearance in the 1950s, just as Viking scholarship was gaining popular attention, reeks of a crafted hoax. The defense presents the parchment's age, the wormhole match that feels like a smoking gun for authenticity, and the new analysis suggesting the ink's core chemistry is medieval. They ask what forger, no matter how skilled, could orchestrate such a perfect storm of physical evidence. The jury is the global community of historians, scientists, and curious minds, and it remains hopelessly deadlocked. Every viewing of the map is now an act of judgment. Do you see a cunning 20th century fabrication, or a fragile, miraculous survivor from the age of exploration? The ink does not lie, but we are still learning how to listen to what it truly says. The journey through these 25 mysterious inks is a map of human obsession itself. We began with the silent, elegant torment of the Voynich Manuscript, a book that invites us in only to lock the door. We followed treasure maps hammered into copper, ghost languages pressed into clay, and prayers written in milk meant only for the eyes of God. We witnessed ink that vanished to save a revolution, and ink forged in volcanic fire to preserve a library. We stood before star charts of breathtaking precision and squares of letters that promised magical protection. Each drop, each impression, each carved line represents a choice: to hide, to preserve, to reveal, or to deceive. From the accountant's tally in ancient Iran to the alchemist's symbolic wedding, the drive is constant. We are a species that must make marks, and within that urge lies a twin desire to be understood and to remain forever mysterious. The common thread is not the ink, but the intention behind it. Every one of these artifacts was created by someone who believed their message was worth the immense labor of encoding it in metal, clay, or vellum. They believed in a future reader, whether that was a fellow spy, a descendant, a god, or simply the relentless curiosity of time. In doing so, they gifted us not just puzzles, but a profound insight into the human condition. Our history is not a clear narrative. It is a palimpsest, a layered text where truths are written over, scraped away, and hidden in plain sight. The frustration we feel when facing the Rongorongo Codex or the Phaistos disc is not a barrier to history. It is the very texture of history. It is the silence between the notes. Will we ever solve them all? Technology is an extraordinary key. X-ray tomography is unrolling carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum. Multispectral imaging is pulling ghost text from recycled parchment. Artificial intelligence analyzes the statistical patterns of undeciphered scripts. Each advance promises another potential breakthrough, another lock clicking open. Yet, some secrets are defended by more than complexity. They are guarded by the total loss of context, by the evaporation of an entire world that gave the words their meaning. The Indus Valley clerk who stamped a seal 3,000 years ago did so in a living language within a web of cultural understanding that has turned to dust. We may one day pass his symbols, but will we ever hear the tone of his voice, understand the joke in his ledger, or feel the weight of the transaction he recorded? Some inks hold secrets that are, in the end, not just about information, but about lost human experience, and so the conversation turns to you. After traveling from Easter Island to Staffordshire, from Pompeii to the Cold War beaches of Australia, Which of these ink mysteries captured your imagination most deeply? Was it the tangible promise of the Beale ciphers, the cosmic clarity of the Dunhuang star atlas, or the heartbreaking silence of the Somerton man's last code? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue the decipherment together. If you crave more journeys into the shadows of history, where artifacts whisper and maps lead to questions instead of answers, be sure to subscribe. Our exploration of the world's greatest enigmas has only just begun.